Hey everybody, welcome to Living Power, your online Bible study where we are walking through the Bible in a year. My name is Shannon Mullins, and if you're just joining us, I want to welcome you to the study. We had quite a number of folks join us over the last 2 weeks while we were walking through a pretty intense 2 weeks in the Psalms. Many of you have told me how much you appreciated those and just saw them in a new way, and I have to say it was quite a blessing for me as well. Each lesson in the psalm took probably double time in preparation for those weeks. It seems like the history lessons for me are a little bit easier. So this week we are going to cover a week of history, and we're back with King David and his son Solomon. David has died, and we are looking at Solomon and the glorious reign in Israel of this kingdom that he is ruling over, King Solomon. So this week is history. Next week we're going to do a little bit of Proverbs. So we have an exciting summer coming up. Actually, we'll be in Proverbs for just a little while, and then moving on to something else. So I do hope you're enjoying the study. I am loving every minute of it, and love your comments, love your emails, and your questions also. Today we are looking at building the temple, and this is really foundationally important to understand about the temple. David, let me give you a little bit of background. David united the 12 tribes of Israel into one kingdom. That's one of many accomplishments. The second thing I wanted to mention to you today is that he established friendly relations with other countries. The king of Tyre, who is Hiram, is one of those treaty relationships that he established. And we kind of gleaned that there was some affinity there, that David was actually able not only to make long-lasting beneficial treaties for his country, but he was able to make good relations with these leaders, and that had not been seen before in Israel. Solomon, we're looking at Solomon today. He reigned 40 years. His reign was from 971 BC to 931 BC, so that kind of gives you the idea of the time period we're looking at. Solomon was prominent also in the international community. He marries the Pharaoh's daughter, and this is very significant because it didn't used to be that the pharaohs would marry outside of their own family. They married each other. And now we see in this period of history, Egypt is in a bit of a decline, and so they're marrying outside, which just speaks to the rise of Israel during this time, and that Egypt is not so high a power as it used to be. We also see that Solomon loved God. Yesterday in our reading, Solomon asked for wisdom, which pleased God immensely. And we see during Solomon's reign, this period of peace begins. David was a fighting man. He was a man of war. It was necessary, it was necessary during that time period, but because of the good work that David did in subduing these peoples around the nation of Israel, Solomon enjoys a period of peace. In addition to peace, we see the period of wealth and prominence in Israel's history. And we see that Solomon gives credit to the blessing of the Lord, which brought prosperity. Today we see a treaty with Tyre. This is the land of Phoenicia. It's today's Lebanon. And you need to understand that Israel was an agricultural society, and Tyre was a commercial society. So when they traded, Solomon's giving food, and the king of Tyre is giving commercial things, building materials. We read about Solomon's wise dealings and judging of these two women. That's a pretty famous story. If you aren't familiar with that, you should go back and read that. It just really describes the wisdom that God gave him, and which caused many people to come to visit Solomon and just be in awe of his wisdom. All right, he had a labor force of foreigners, 153,000 foreigners, it says. Those would have been the Canaanites. This represented about 1 of 40 men in the land. So a commentary that I was studying said it really wasn't oppressive. However, the people had to work 1 month out of 3 for the king. So this was a time of taxation, and it was a time of being kind of brought into to the labor force during this huge building construction time in the life of Israel. The building of the temple took place in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, and it took, do you remember how long it took to build the temple? The Bible says 7 years. It was actually 7.5 to be exact. So from 966 to 959, we're seeing the temple being built. It was in the 2nd month that they started, the Bible tells us that, and so that was April or May, and it was in the 8th month that it ended, and that would have been around October. That's how we get 7.5 years. Interestingly enough, I know you guys like all these little facts, in Ezra, 430 years later, they have to rebuild the temple, and interestingly enough, they rebuild the temple also in the 2nd month. That happens at the same time. Now, this is 480 years after they left Egypt, and there aren't a lot of dates to really remember. However, there is one that you really kind of should remember. 1446 BC is the Exodus, and that is a focal point. You can kind of figure things out if you know that date. So 1446 was the Exodus. This is 480 years after that, so we're about 966 BC. I love Solomon's attitude in 2 Chronicles 2 verse 6. Did you catch this? It says, "Who am I to build a house for God except to offer sacrifices to him?" What a humble attitude he had. It says, God is greater than all the gods, so his house must be great. And he did create a very great temple for the Lord. It describes the purpose of the temple was to build incense. It was to display the bread of the presence and to offer sacrifices. They were offering sacrifices morning and night on the Sabbath, at the new moon, and at the festival. So lots of sacrifices going on. We're introduced to a master craftsman today. Huram Abi is a metal worker. He's half Jewish, he's half Phoenician, and today and especially tomorrow we're going to read about these things that he makes out of bronze. Boy, I'd love to have him come over to my house and make a couple of things. It's just beautiful craftsmanship. Of course, it's through inspiration of the Holy Spirit that he's able to do these things. But it's very, very beautiful to look at. I'm going to show you some pictures over the next couple of days of some of the things that he's making. Let's talk about the king of Tyre for just a minute. This king of Tyre could have been the son of the king of Tyre that David was interacting with. I'm not really sure. This particular king reigned from 969 to 935 BC. One commentary said it could have even been the grandson, but since there's differing of opinion, I'm not going to state specifically who it was, but it was probably not the same king that David was interacting with. This city, Tyre, was the leading city of Phoenicia. These Phoenicians were the ones that developed the first alphabet. I'm sure you remember that from school. They had a trading monopoly on these cedar logs, and that's what Solomon needed to export or import into his country in order to build the temple. They needed a lot of wood because they built the temple on stone overlaid with wood and overlaid with pure gold. They also ended up importing gold from the king of Tyre as well. Chapters 5 and 6 in the reading today show the fulfillment of God's promise that Solomon would take on the throne and that Solomon would build the temple. So they are very important in our reading and our understanding. God gives a warning today. Do you remember what that warning was? It's kind of the same warning that he's been giving all along, isn't it? Obey the commandments I give you, and I will never leave. I will never abandon you. Very important warning. Now, the temple is strikingly beautiful. It's not very big, though. It's only twice the size of the tabernacle, 2,700 square feet of floor space. It was made of stone, which we mentioned, and it was just opulent in its beauty because of all this gold. It was embellished with precious stones, and I don't know if you caught that, but they would they would quarry the stone at a different place because they didn't think it was appropriate to have all that banging and hammering and that kind of noise at the site of the temple. What a posture of respect. The temple faced east, but the entrance was to the south. Now, what did the temple have that the tabernacle did not have? That's a great study to do on your own. I'll give you just a couple of thoughts. The temple had windows, the tabernacle did not. It had an actual floor. It was twice the size, and of course, obviously, it was permanent. It was immovable. The tabernacle moved with the people, but this was a permanent place that the Lord had decided and had specified it that He wanted. He wanted Jerusalem to be His permanent dwelling place. They also added 2 additional cherubim in the Holy of Holies. That was not in the tabernacle. And this porch in 2 Chronicles 3 added 15 feet to its length. This was not a part of the original tabernacle. The side rooms and the pictures that I'm going to show you this week were used for storage and for service. The New Testament doesn't give as much background into the temple as it does the tabernacle. Here's kind of a spiritual difference between the tabernacle and the temple. The tabernacle, some say, pictured Christ in His humility, and the temple pictured Christ in His glory. Some say the tabernacle pictures our pilgrim life. This is not our home, but this is just a place where we're moving through to go to heaven, our eternal home, and that the temple is a picture of our co-reigning with Christ when He returns again for His second coming. So I think those are really neat spiritual pictures to look at. Well, tomorrow we're going to look more at the temple. We're going to look at the king's house, other courts that he built, and we're going to see that this construction project of the temple and the palaces actually took 20 years. So notice that in your reading tomorrow. This is really important, this foundational understanding of the temple and how it came to be, because there will be 3 temples total, and there will be a temple which has not yet been built. We are waiting for the fulfillment of this temple. It's in Ezekiel. We're going to read about that, but this is during the millennial reign of Christ. There will be an actual temple on Mount Zion at Temple Mount, and it will be the place where Jesus is and where He reigns throughout the world during His 1,000-year reign, which is yet to come. So it's very important foundational understanding when we especially talk about the end times prophecy and those things. So I hope you've enjoyed this history lesson. We're going to be talking about history for the next couple of days, and then we go into Proverbs next week. So that's it for today, and I will see you again tomorrow. Blessings to you and your family. Shalom.